Capitol today as he once more tried to sell his illegal immigration bill. He took with him White House Press Secretary Tony Snow, who joins us now. Tony, were you in the room when the president made his hard sell for immigration reform?
I was in the room, but he didn't do a hard sell. As a matter of fact, the first thing he said, Chris, is, look, guys, I know that there are agreements and disagreements here. You got to keep in mind, first thing off, we're friends. And he reached out to Senator Jeff Sessions and he said, Senator, I know you disagree with me, but there's nothing you can do to prevent me from coming down to Mobile next week to raise money for you. And I think, you know, that kind of broke the ice, and people realized that the president there was really talking about how to improve a bill that addresses a problem everybody acknowledges exists and that we got to deal with and we got to fix. And I think from then on, what you had were a series of conversations, not merely about immigration reform. We talked about a whole series of things. But basically, the tone was very constructive. It was pleasant. It was collegial. And the attitude now seems to be on the part of a lot of folks, let's roll up our sleeves and fix this thing and let's do it together.
Let me ask you this. How does an employer who wants to hire somebody know that a person's in the country legally? How do you avoid breaking the law if you're running a hotel or you're running a golf course, you're running a business of any kind, right, and you want to make sure you don't hire anybody in the country illegally? How do you know that?
Right now, it's almost impossible. As you know, there's a brisk business in document fraud and forgery. And one of the key elements, you were talking about this not so long ago, in the president's proposal, is to come up with a tamper-proof ID, something that has biometric markers, fingerprint or something that you can't fake, that it provides proof certain of who the individual is. And at that point, then you're in a position to figure out whether somebody is here legally. And furthermore, the government has the ability to keep track of those individuals. And at the same time, it also is in a position then to say to employers, you now have no excuses.
Okay.
If you do not have that proof certain, then guess what? You cannot hire the person, or you're going to pay the piper.
So if I go looking for a job, somebody's going to ask me for an ID card, a biometrically a tamper-proof ID card. Is that right?
Could be. You know, there are a lot of states.
Wait a minute. This is very important. You can't say could be, Tony. If I have to get a job, anybody has to get a job, we have to have the same law for everyone, or this is all BS. Is there going to be a national ID card you have to show?
Chris, I know you're a big star, but your passport will also work. I mean, there are some things where you've got the kinds of ID that is going to pass muster. But the fact is...
But that's the stuff that's always been bogus.
Let me finish. I'm still trying to answer your question.
But
virtually every state has also signed on to something called Real ID, which in fact does include those markers. So there's a real chance that in fact you're going to get exactly what you want, and which makes sense, which is to have a system where you're going to have to make sure that everybody's legit.
Well, I'm reading from the New York Times today, front page story. But the Senate bill, that's the bill that the president's pushing, and you're helping him push, like the 1986 law, quote, forbids the use of national identification cards.
On the other hand, keep in mind, this does not, forbidding a national identification card does not, in fact, preclude having a tamper-proof identification card that itself contains markers. As I've just told you, every state has an obligation now to come up with Real ID. That's also federal law, and it would have the same kind of markers. It doesn't mean that it would be a federal card, but it does mean that in each and every state, individuals would have to have it.
But everything now is bogus because everything is forged now. That's the problem. You addressed it yourself. If we can't prevent people from hiring people illegally, they're going to keep climbing across the border. We know that, and yet you can't explain to me. You said I could go show a passport. Well, then I could forge a passport because they're forgeable.
Well, but what you can't forge is your fingerprint.
Well, how do we show?
Again, that gets back to the. Let me step back. You've got Real ID requirements, which are going to affect you and me, and they will have biometric markers. Everybody's supposed to have them. In addition,
well, then it's in effect a national ID card
as well.
So in effect, we're going to have a national ID card system. Maybe it's a card or not. It's a national system of identification and verification, you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, why is everybody screaming about this? Rudy Giuliani says it's only for aliens. Romney says it's just for aliens. Every time I moderate one of these debates or talk to these candidates, they give me the BS. They say only foreigners have to have an ID card. Again, Americans don't. Well, that can't be the case. It's got to be the same rule for everybody. That's why this bill's not going anywhere, Tony, because people aren't talking straight about it. If we're going to be able to verify a job seeker, then you and I have to be verified just as well as anybody who came here from Mexico. And that's what what nobody seems to want to. Why do we read the sentence? The Senate bill forbids the use of national ID cards. What's the point of saying that if it's really going to have a national identification system?
As I was saying, Chris, you're going to have the ability. What you want is a one-size-fits-all, everybody has the same ID. What I'm telling you is that there are going to be requirements for biometric markers. And so I think we're talking past each other. This is not a deal killer. As a matter of fact, you've got provisions now that are going to have requirements for you and me, and they're going to be a separate set of requirements with the same kind of markers for those who come here illegally.
Well, like most Americans, I don't trust the United States government to enforce the law because it never has in the past, especially with regard to immigration. It panders to business and to the groups that want to come in the country. It does not enforce the law. You're telling me starting after this bill is signed in the Rose Garden, all of a sudden the United States government is going to get serious about preventing people from hiring people illegally.
Yeah, no, let me
that?
draw a couple of distinctions between present law and what we're proposing here. Number one, you've already pointed out the tamper-proof ID. Under the 1986 reforms, there was no punishment for crossing the border illegally. It wasn't even. It was a civil infraction, not even a misdemeanor, if you stayed here illegally. And finally, if you're an employer who hired illegally, you got a wrist slap at the worst. So the fact is, there was no enforcement. Now, the employers have to have proof of citizenship, and if they don't, they get fines of up to $75,000 per illegal employee.
Okay, great.
There's a much
Tony.
bigger hammer, and guess what? We're about to have a thunderstorm here, Chris.
Thank you very much. Sorry, get inside, Tony. Thank you very much for